All right, let's get right into it. If you are running a business, you already know that managing people is complicated. But when you're operating in South Africa, and specifically right in the middle of the bustling economic hub of Johannesburg, it goes way, way beyond just managing people. We are talking about navigating an incredibly complex, heavily regulated landscape of human resources and statutory compliance. It's a literal minefield out there. So today, we are breaking down a comprehensive overview from VCA Consulting on exactly how you can survive and honestly thrive in this unique compliance environment. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the Johannesburg HR landscape, then hit the 7 core functions, move into industrial relations, cover equity, BBBE, and skills, and finally wrap up with internal versus outsourced HR.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Johannesburg HR landscape.
Johannesburg's sheer size and its incredible sector diversity mean that a generic HR checklist, that simply won't work. Picture this. On one hand, you have a financial services firm operating right in Sandton. They are dealing with highly specific sectoral determinations and intense BBBE procurement pressures from clients. But then, just a short drive away, you have a manufacturing plant in Industria. They are navigating totally different bargaining council obligations and have a massive, heavy focus on occupational safety. The big risk for both of them? Trying to apply one generic, downloaded contract template across roles that legally require completely different treatment. It's a recipe for disaster.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 7 core functions.
Every employer needs a baseline, and these are the 7 core functions behind solid HR services. We've got recruitment and onboarding, payroll and compensation, employee benefits administration, employee relations, compliance and risk management, performance management, and finally training and development. Now you might be looking at this list and thinking, well, yeah, that's standard. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway from the source material. A gap in any of these 7 functions rarely rears its ugly head in your day-to-day operations. No, a gap here almost always blows up out of nowhere during a compliance audit, or suddenly you're sitting at a CCMA hearing. You've got to have these baselines locked down.
Which brings us to Section 3, Industrial Relations and Compliance.
Let's define exactly what we mean by HR and IR, Industrial Relations Services, in this context. It encompasses the management of workplace relations, policy development, disciplinary code standardization, and CCMA representation. The source makes a really vital point here that you cannot ignore. Industrial relations failures carry the absolute highest financial and reputational cost of any HR gap you can possibly have, period. This is the backbone of your business's protection.
Just listen to this. A single procedural error in a dismissal hearing can produce months of CCMA arbitration. Just one misstep. Think about it. If a manager gets frustrated, skips a step in your disciplinary code, or if a hearing isn't procedurally fair, you aren't just looking at a minor slap on the wrist. You are looking at grueling, time-consuming, and incredibly expensive arbitration. This right here is exactly why having independent disciplinary hearing chairpersons is so highly recommended in the Johannesburg market.
All right, let's pivot to Section 4, Equity, BBE, and Skills.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how South African labor legislation maps very specific challenges directly to required solutions. Frameworks like employment equity and BBBE are strictly statutory business compliances. So, if you miss your EAA2 or EAA4 deadlines, you instantly need employment equity consulting with workforce audits. If you have a weak BBBE scorecard, well, you're actively closing off your own access to government contracts and corporate supply chains. That requires real scorecard strategy across all 5 elements. And the source actually notes that a lot of SMEs have weak scores not because transformation is impossible, but simply because no one has actually sat down and structured those elements correctly.
Let me ask you a question. Are you claiming your skills development levy back? Because this is easily one of the most overlooked opportunities we're covering today. If your annual payroll sits above a certain statutory threshold, you are paying this levy every single month. To get it back, you just have to submit a compliant workplace skills plan and an annual training report on time. If you do that, the applicable SETA repays you a mandatory grant. But incredibly, most businesses never file this correctly and they just forfeit funds they are completely entitled to recover. It's crazy.
And rounding out this compliance section is health and safety. The Occupational Health and Safety Act is definitely not an optional extra. It makes workplace safety a strict legal requirement. And yes, it is backed by actual criminal penalties. It's comprehensive too. We're talking everything from the physical risks of heavy machinery on a factory floor all the way to psychological hazards like severe workplace stress.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, Internal versus Outsourced HR.
This is the ultimate question every single business faces once their headcount passes that critical point. You know, the point where informal, fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants management just completely stops working. So, do you build an internal HR function, or do you outsource it?
Well, the answer usually comes down to volume. Internal HR is fantastic for businesses that have constant, daily HR activity. But keep in mind, it carries the fixed year-round salary cost of a permanent human resource officer. Outsourced HR, on the other hand, gives you access to deep, specialist knowledge across all those complex areas we just talked about, like BBEE, equity, payroll, IR, but it's on a scalable retainer or a per-project basis. It's really tailored for businesses with intermittent needs that want that full, ironclad compliance coverage, just without the heavy fixed overhead.
For some context, the material we've been analyzing today comes from VCA Consulting. And that year, 1996, is pretty significant. That's the year they were established as a national HR consultancy. So they have been delivering these specialized end-to-end outsourced services to Gatong employers for literally decades. They scale their support for everyone from tiny 5-person operations all the way up to massive corporates. When you're in a geographical minefield like Johannesburg, having that kind of deep, specific experience is clearly paramount.
Which brings us to our final, critical thought for you to take away today. I want you to look at your own business and ask yourself, is your current HR setup a strategic asset, or is it a compliance liability just waiting to blow up at the CCMA? Understanding the landscape is step 1, right? But structuring your compliance correctly, that's step 2. If you aren't 100% sure where you stand right now, it might be time to seek a tailored consultation specific to your sector and your headcount. Thanks so much for joining me on This Explainer, and keep learning.